Welcome to the Biltmore Church Podcast. Our church exists to glorify God by making disciples of Jesus who reach up, reach in, and reach out. And this podcast is a resource to hopefully help you do just that. My name is Christian. I serve on staff here, and I'm so glad to welcome you to another episode. We're back for season 4, right in the middle of our family circus teaching series, where we've been talking about how the gospel and how the family collide together and what we're supposed to do with all the different things in the Bible that are said about the family. And that's what we're going to be talking about even more today, the family circus. So quick introductions. I'm here with our lead pastor, Bruce Frank, as always, or as almost always, right? And we are recording on Sunday afternoon. You just got done preaching twice, so hopefully the voice holds.
Oh, it's fine.
More energy. And also, we have a special guest with us here today, Donna Gibbs. Thank you for being with us. I got
Always
some bio here. Donna is the co-owner of Summit Wellness Centers, who are friends of our church, partners of our church, which provides real hope and practical help for life's hurts through the venues of professional Christian counseling, writing, speaking, and consulting. Donna's bio goes on and on and on. Author of several books, blogs, articles, things that have been featured on media outlets. You've been serving individuals and families for nearly 25 years, maybe over 25 years now. I don't know if that bio is updated or not. So many different things I could say. You're also a member of our church. And so we're so glad to have you on today. I think it's going to be a great discussion.
Yeah, grateful to be here.
Talking about family rhythms, talking about Sabbath. So before we get into any of that, would love to look back a little bit and ask really both of you what stood out from our services today, whether that's from the message or anything that you saw today you'd want to talk through.
Well, I learned probably more. I learned more this week than I have in a long time, just because I haven't preached on Sabbath, and when I did, it was probably 10 years ago, and hopefully I've got a little more smarts than then, but just and had time to really. There was just a lot of application. So both Bible stuff, looking at the Bible references and Sabbath and what does that mean and what does it mean now, and then also just practical stuff. I mean, literally, it was some easy stuff. It's like, all right, don't spend. You just wasted 15 minutes looking at dog videos. Don't do that. I mean, that's 15 minutes you can't get back. And I didn't even use it this morning, but one thing is, time is the most valuable thing we have. I mean, you can make new friends, you can make more money, you can't make more time. And especially when it comes to the family, some of those just pure statistics were good convicting for me, but also just how good God is to give us a rhythm. And really even, in the creation story, is like first thing he tells Adam and Eve after the cultural mandate is, before we do that, that was good. It was super helpful personally for me.
That's awesome.
Yes, and I am just so grateful that this was the topic of the sermon even today, because it's an area that God is always stirring me about. Rest is hard for me. I'm just my personality, my temperament. When I sense God calling me to do something, I want to get on it, and so it's convicting. But it was also refreshing for me in another way. There was one thing that you said that I was so grateful that you said, if you work with your mind, rest with your hands. And so literally this weekend, I've spent most of the weekend redoing my grandmother's old rocking chair, and it has been so good for me. And I always say to Mark, it is so, when I can do something with my hands, doing something with the house or in a garden or restoring an old chair, it does refresh me. Taking a nap is not necessarily going to refresh me in the same way. So I was grateful that you just validated that for people.
I can't remember, some rabbi, I think. I can't remember. I heard it like 4 times, almost on all the resources, and I never could find the definitive. Who is the original resource? But it kept saying, I was like, that's true. That's why, I work with my mind like Donna does 95% of the time. And so, that it almost answered, it's like, that's why that's refreshing. That's why that is restorative. So there was a lot of stuff I learned. And also, if you just do stuff and recreate, everybody's come back from either a vacation or everybody's come back and like, man, I'm so tired. I just got back. And some of it's stuff I learned on the sabbatical, the difference between just, physical rest and then emotional and spiritual rhythms. And that was sort of learned a lot. I mentioned the guys a little while ago. I learned a lot out of like that Crawford Loritz book. Crawford was on here a couple months ago, and his book on leadership as an identity, and how that just talked about, all right, there's seasons, and if you have a season of brokenness, what is your response to that? And people sometimes respond poorly to that and live in their wound, or do they just let God kind of restore that, teach that, and then you live, you have the scar still, but you're ministering. God's redeemed it and He's healed it, but it's still there. But you've learned from it. So that's kind of getting off but I learned that on extended time of just getting emotionally and spiritually recharged.
Well, I will be taking a nap this afternoon after we finish
the Baptist hour.
That's right. It'll be a very quiet period of time there. No, that's all very helpful stuff. I really would love to just kind of continue our conversation from here and keep talking about maybe some practical things, but also while we have you here talking about kind of this space where the theological in the Bible collides with brain and science. And I mean, it's so easy to do that because they work together so well. But just talking about healthy rhythms, and particularly rest and Sabbath and some of the things that kind of produces in us. Pastor, one of the things I've heard you said, healthy families have healthy rhythms. Maybe is a good place to start. So how have you seen that play out, whether in your own life or in families of people at our church, just how much healthy rhythms matter?
Sure. I mean, because the culture's changed so much. I mean, if you go back even pre-industrial revolution, family was together all the time because they were, son was out with dad behind a plow or something like that. So there were some rhythms built in that to some degree helped, and then with the Industrial Revolution and the lazy boy and all those rhythms got changed quite often. And so now the intentionality is very important. I just want to be intentional about how am I stewarding my time, really. I mean, that's really what it is. It's just stewarding the time. I mentioned, I think, before we came on air, is that is the most valuable resource we have, because we can make other stuff. We can make more money, more friends, more whatever. We can't make more time. We have what we have. And for me, I mean, I alluded to it, and maybe Lori alluded to it last week on the podcast, but I would say for us, it is I wouldn't say it saved our marriage, but it put our marriage in a much better place when we started to take basically an intentional Sabbath focused on together.
Yeah.
Because before that, when you have the kids, you have those rhythms, and some of them are necessary because you're just you're mixture of a carpool, counselor, coach, all that kind of stuff, and it can you can easily get to where it revolves around them, even fighting against it. And then, then you go to another one, and then you start, you move to it. In our case, you come to church and you got all that. And then but taking a time, I think we started 8 years ago and there's occasionally times where it gets interrupted, but you built enough credit and chips in the relational bank that you're not overdrawn just because you have a emergency on Friday night. But pretty much from Friday evening to Saturday evening, barring something, for us maritally, we're like, okay, that's pretty much, we're going to just do, even if it's not creative, it might be the gym, it might be, what do we see? We watched Oppenheimer yesterday, which, I mean, it's, probably wasn't the best investment. 3 hours of this is very serious. We should have watched Barbie. But at the same time, it was still, you were investing in each other, and then that just that overflows to, our church and the kids. So that rhythm goes into other rhythms, but rhythm is just your pattern of life, so church-wise, but Sabbath is the kind of the overall one. And originally this wasn't even I don't even think this was actually initially going to be an Advent, because all our staff are millennials, so they're like, oh, this is like the hottest topic.
Yeah.
And I actually fight against a little bit some of the teaching. I think some of the teaching is like, just go slower and ease through life. And as I said, I don't see that in the Bible. I see Paul in Colossians 1 saying, listen, man, we labor to exhaustion to disciple and to evangelize this generation. But what I did see, and what I had ignored too, is it's not just slow down, it's stop. Right. Live in rhythm. If you live in rhythm, then you're not going to get as crazy. And at times, somebody told me a long time ago, it's like, take a weekly Sabbath. This is family, and I think it might have been marital. It's like a weekly Sabbath, once a quarter get away for can't remember, at least a big long weekend, and once a year get away for a week. It's something. There's some
That's
rhythm,
right, yeah.
but it's just rhythms. What are you prioritizing? I mean, we prioritize what's important, and when we prioritize that's what we spend time on. If your priority is a low handicap, you're going to spend a lot of time getting that handicap down. But if it's a healthy marriage or whatever, you're going to invest in that. So all I tried to do today was just give some tools. I mean, it's easy one. It's just like, just turn this off this afternoon. And I promise you'll love it, because I did a little bit of it this week, and even that little baby step, I could kind of feel myself, I'm not doom scrolling. I'm not looking at, what's, the next crisis, which is every day.
Yeah. You might get withdrawals at first, and then you're going to feel good after on the other side of that. Yeah. When you reach for your phone and you realize it's not there. Yeah.
I read a deal. I think it's 82% of us have what they call phantom. It's like a phantom buzz. It's like, I didn't use it today, but we imagine that our phone buzzes and it doesn't even buzz. I'm like, how sick is that? We are sick people that it's not even buzzing and we're imagining it buzzing because we're so addicted. But,
and I just echo all of that. Healthy families, healthy rhythms. I think we live in a distressed world, and we have very little tolerance for distress. Sometimes whether we realize we have rhythms or not, we've got rhythms. They're not necessarily healthy rhythms. Yeah, right. And I think even though, I think of many of the families who are listening who have children at home and might sometimes feel like, I feel bad if I give too much of a rhythm or too much of a structure. Actually, that is when we feel most secure. So when we think, okay, we're living in this anxious, stressed world, some of those rhythms actually allow that to calm and allow us to increase our tolerance of the distress of the world that we're living in. We are living in that world. It's hard.
And it is speeded up. I mean, just looking at historical markers, you go back to sometime like printing press and all that stuff. But I really do, looking at it, 2007 accelerated a lot of stuff. When that's when they say we're now in the digital age. Because you did go, I mean, there was a time, I know, again, not just going way back, but rhythms were dictated, even like the news. News came on at 10, weather at 10:17, sports at 10:22. There was kind of rhythms built in. And news was news because it was, they only had like
in those pockets.
50, But now, I mean, I'm not blaming them. I'm just saying if you're 24/7 news network, you have to be coming up with news and coming up with crisis, and all that is accelerated. But 2000, this is awesome because you can maybe do some stuff. You're more mobile, but on the other hand, you're never alone. That's what dawned on me. If you have this on you, you're never alone. You bring the world with you, which is good, but it's almost like it stays. Your stress level almost stays up all the time, simmering, so you don't have the margin.
The noise.
There's no margin.
It totally does. Yeah. And all the research would agree with you.
Yeah, it stays up, The brain stuff, by the way, that's the brain stuff, which I know Miss Donna knows a lot more about, that is still fascinating. It's fascinating on a good or bad level. It's fascinating. It's bad level because this is like not good that your brain looks like a gambling addict. But it's awesome. It makes so much sense when Jesus, the truth and the truth will set you free, and how your brain can get rewired in a good way by replacing lies with truth, gratitude with entitlement. And I'm like, that's amazing that God will just heal that part of it. But it is amazing when it looks like just what it does neurologically. Your anthropology meets your theology is kind of an amazing deal.
It does. But that reminder too, no one ever sets out to be an addict to anything. Not to be hijacked by a phone or a substance or anything. It's the passivity, which brings us back to these rhythms that without intention, we're going to have some rhythm. What is it going to be? If we're passive to it, we're going to end up with some hodgepodge of something. Yeah. If we're intentional, then it's more likely to be aligned with what is glorifying to God, healthy, physically, emotionally, spiritually for us.
And it's just a gift. I mean, that's what was amazing. I kept going over because, again, I didn't grow up in that. I didn't ever think Sabbath or anything. It's not growing up in church. But my wife grew up in that, and she was like, you can't do that. The whole thing was what you cannot do. Right. And there is some, where does wisdom turn into legalism? I don't know what the answer is. But because, a lot of this is wise. You're trying not to fall into it. But at some point, it gets to be this is the day of sadness. You're not allowed to be happy. But you look at it, Sabbaths talk about eat and feast and drink and, there's nap. This is a gift from God for us, for our betterment. And that was super refreshing.
What's up, everybody? We're pressing pause on our discussion real quick to tell you about a new resource that our discipleship team has been working really hard on. I'm here with Christian Sides today. He's our central discipleship coordinator, and I would love for you to share a little bit about our new Rhythms resource that you've been working hard on.
Yeah, we're so pumped about what Pastor Bruce has been laying out, specifically this Sunday with Sabbath. The rhythms and lifestyles of Jesus, how transformation truly is possible through the lifestyle of Jesus. And so in the rhythms page, we lay out some different practices and rhythms that we see from the life of Jesus, one of those being Sabbath. Each rhythm connects a daily, a weekly, and a monthly rhythm that you as an individual, you as a family, you as a connect group can do together as you do life together, which we hope everyone does.
Yeah, so what would you say is the main goal of that Rhythms resource for people who are interested?
Let me share what the goal is not before I share what the main goal is. The goal is not to add something to your already busy, hurry lifestyle. I feel like in the culture of sports tournaments that happen almost every week, it feels like, of kids, of work, of everything that this culture has to offer. It is not to add something else to your life. It's rather actually subtraction. To simplify your life around the lifestyle, the teachings, and the rhythms that we see in the life of Jesus. But the main goal, like anything I write for Biltmore, is to equip disciples of Jesus to reach up, to reach in, and to reach out. And so the rhythms, ultimately from the life of Jesus, we see how we can reach up in some of these. So there's Sabbath being one, prayer being another one, scripture, how can we reach up in our rhythms of those three. There's some with reach in, whether it be with community, whether it be with service. And then for reach out, we have rhythms like work and hospitality go along with it. And so we see all these from the life of Jesus. But then also throughout the New Testament with other people like Peter, like John, like Paul, all throughout the New Testament. And so that's the main goal, is to create a space of subtraction to simplify your life around the teachings, lifestyle, and rhythms of Jesus.
That's awesome, man. So it sounds like really for anybody who's a follower of Jesus, this is going to be really helpful for them.
Whether you're a student, whether you're a kid, whether you're a young parent. I've 2 kids under the age of 2, and so Sabbath looks a lot different than it would for some other people. And so it literally, wherever you are in the spectrum of your journey with Jesus, it is for everyone.
Yeah, so this is live right now on our website, right?
Yeah, so if you want to go to biltmorechurch.com/rhythms, you can pull it up. And right now there's only 2, there's prayer and Sabbath. And so throughout the year, we'll be launching new ones, we'll be creating new ones. And so right now it's only prayer and Sabbath that are up and live. And then as well throughout the year, we'll be launching some new ones.
It's a great place to start. Make sure you guys check it out. One of the things that I think you can see if you look at the life of Jesus, you read the Gospels, like you mentioned earlier, it wasn't like he wasn't working hard, right? He had a full schedule, he had a lot going on, but he also wasn't in a hurry. He wasn't hurried. He could slow down when needed. He could stop when needed. So anything just from Jesus' own life that can inform our rhythms that stand out to either one of you.
Mm-hmm. You go.
The fact that he's the sovereign king of the universe is, I'm like, that's not fair. I did notice most of his healings, I think it's the vast majority of his healings were on the Sabbath, which surprised me a little bit.
Interesting.
Yeah. The ones that are recorded, I'm like, all right. And you see a lot of stuff that happened on the Sabbath. I'm like, was that was he like intentionally kind of digging the folks, or are those the ones that I don't know the answer to that, but yeah, he was rarely in a hurry. But I will say his rhythm, he had the Jewish rhythms as a Jewish man, but also you do see several times, and I don't remember the references right off the bat, but and they're like little snippets. And so it says, and Jesus got up early and went off by himself to pray. And so he had the rhythms, what we would call personal quiet time or whatever, but you saw that so that the people weren't in an interruption. I think we all know what it's like. If you're already maxed out, because we're all in ministry, if you're maxed out on the front end, there's so little margin, then people are interruptions. They're projects. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it kind of takes you off. I respect Donna so much for many reasons, but also the fact she's a counselor. Because I'm like, I've told you, I'm a terrible counselor because I just want to just stop doing that.
Yeah, change.
It's not, but just the rhythm of being able to pour into other people I mean, if you're doing that all the time, which she's doing that all the time, if you're not filling back up, and other people can do it. I mean, marriages, that's what we talk about. Husbands, if you, especially, I mean, single moms, is there a harder job than that? I almost meant to mention that. I did mean to mention that today. But spouses, you can help your spouse Sabbath a little bit. When I come home at night and she's had Malia all day, I got to realize, and some of it's just being decent, like, hey, let's go to Boone's Corner tonight. We're not, or whatever. But some of it's just realizing that's been a drain. As much as she loves it, that's been a drain. But some of it, nobody can do for you but you. That's the part that's kind of, I know when she's counseling people, you counsel them in the immediate, but you're trying to get them to like I do. I try to help them my goal is to whet the appetite of the people to get in the Bible. It's not just to have an event. It's like, I want you to see, and so to self-feed. And that's the part that I think rhythms can really help.
Yeah, and when I look at that, just as Jesus modeled it, what we might look at as inconvenience, he actually sought those people out. He didn't wait for them to just come to him. He sought them out, and he was fully present, fully engaged. I don't think there would have ever been a situation in which somebody wondered, did he hear me? Did he see me? Did he understand what I'm dealing with? But then he also, part of that rhythm is that he would leave them needing something, and he would go to the Father. And that is, that's certainly a rhythm that I have to take, that I am aware of my humanity. I can't help everyone. I have to be refreshed, and it has to start on a Friday afternoon for me, or I would have burnt out many, many, many years ago.
Yeah, and it has to start with God, right?
It does. It does. But it's not just that I'm spending all of that time just focusing on him. It is like when I talk about I'm refinishing my grandmother's chair. When I do that, I'm also remembering things that give me reason to praise him. And I'm looking at that wood like in awe of a creator. And so it does all blend together, but it's just essential. And Jesus, walking also as man, had that rhythm that gives us permission to do the same.
I would say one thing again. I keep forgetting what we talked about before we went on air. When we didn't, but we were talking about how I wanted to give people permission, because you talk about worship and being with God's people, church, so to speak. We talked about reconnecting with your family, but there is a section in there that is individual to some degree. It's, in other words, what is it that fills you up, and that is the part that's there's freedom there. What is it yourself? And for some people, and again, the problem is when you ignore the first two, you ignore the soul work with God, and you ignore the the emotional, so to speak, connection with people, and you just make this the only thing. But I would say you want to figure out what is it that fills you up and what is it that drains you. And what you don't want to do is have all drain and no filling up, because at some point something's going to break. I mean, again, something will break. It might take years, but something will eventually break. Either your moral fiber will break, your marriage will break, your family, something will break. So again, the Sabbath is just that gift, that rhythm. One Sabbath is probably not going to change your whole family. As a matter of fact, it might make it awkward. Like, we haven't talked to each other in a long time. Now we're talking, we're in a fight now. But it's the start of a rhythm, and that's why I wanted to encourage them. Make it fun. There's a lot of fun. I mean, but go out into a nice restaurant, or go to the park, or go do something that recreates you, not just recreates you, recreates you. And some of that's individual.
There's a lot of freedom. So you're really on the front lines of a lot of this, and seeing both the fruits of people with healthy rhythms and not. So I wondered if there's anything, just from your point of view, that you're seeing a lot of in our culture, in our world, that maybe people can be watching out for, or battling or fighting against with some of the things we're talking about.
Yeah, well, like I said, we live in a stressed, anxious, traumatized world. That's what we see a lot of, And I think study a lot about resilience, and resilience is really, it just boils down to how you cope. What are the coping skills that you're using? I don't think of Sabbath in a legalistic term. I know many people listening have never grown up even thinking about the word Sabbath. I didn't grow up thinking about the word Sabbath. I just know when I'm thirsty, And so, again, resilience is all about how you're coping, the skills that you're using to cope. And those are either going to be things that you use to help you numb, help you escape, help you get a high, help you feel in control. It's going to be in one of those categories. And that's just going to keep you right where you are. But resilience, like bouncing forward, moving beyond just this stressed, anxious place, is a rhythm that looks very, very different. And it's a lot of what we're talking about. I know we've talked kind of offhand about what else goes along with people who are practicing some of this rest. And it's a physical, it's an emotional, it's a spiritual, it's a relational, it's a whole person context.
Yeah.
And that's what that's hard for control people. Being one. I mean, it is a control thing. That's kind of going back to Crawford's book. There are some things like, you can't control this. I don't care how hard you work, how much you do, whatever. And it's actually, and that ends up leading to a season of brokenness, which is good. It's good if you allow that to kind of turn into surrender. That's what he says. It's like brokenness needs to lead the leader to be surrendered. In the same way, I mean, there's some stuff you can't control. And certain types, that's why Sabbath is it's almost like it's like sleep. I mean, sleep is like a daily reminder that, you know what, we think we have it all in control, and it's kind of like God going, all right, boy, all right, I'm just going to put you down for about 8 hours.
Yeah.
And let's guess what? I'm going to be here in the morning when you get up, and the world's still going to be here, and why don't you just lay down? And so I think it was Spurgeon that talked about it. It's a daily reminder that we are not the sovereign king of the universe. It's like, it's good. And Sabbath is the same way. I mean, can I trust God to do in 6/7 of the time that I think I can do in 7/7? And that's why I said I think the corollary is also tithing. I mean, without getting into the deep rules of tithing or Sabbath, do I trust? It is a trust issue. It's a trust issue. Do I trust that if I live in rhythm with God financially or emotionally, that He will make up that? So it does come down to, do I trust God to do it? That's why, by the way, I mean, Chick-fil-A, you respect. I mean, regardless of that, you got to respect. You got to respect that, and they're certainly not hurting on. They're certainly not hurting on any franchises.
Yeah, I'm hurting on Sundays when I want.
I'm hurting. I mean, that's true. I mean, it's like, hey, there's no line. Oh, it's Sunday. Okay, so.
Oh well. So maybe let's kind of start steering toward, for people who are listening and watching. Maybe they were at church today and they're like, man, I want a place to start. I'm tired. I'm burned out. I'm frustrated. I'm having trouble stopping. What would be some easy application steps for people who are looking just to begin?
Yeah. I just think of pockets, microdosing.
Yeah.
So maybe, and literally you referenced single mothers. My mind immediately went to those single moms or many moms. Many moms live in a traditional belief system in their family, but they don't live an actual traditional, and they're working full time, but they're having to hold all things together, and they're weary. So I think about them, and to them it may feel like you're asking one more thing,
right?
And that means somebody's not going to be fed, you know. Yeah. And so really, let's look at it as pockets of time, and it is a daily rhythm. It is maybe a little bit in the morning and a little bit in the evening every day, so that you really can find rest, not just in your mind, in your soul, but your physiological being. And those, again, just some really specific practical things. And there's a lot of research that comes behind this. Microdosing all is another way of looking at it. The world uses the word all. We know what that means. That means worship. When I really set my mind to something that leads me then to my Creator, and I just sit in His presence. That can take the time that you're sitting at a stoplight. Yeah. And so you start somewhere and you start seeing there is some value in me coming into His presence, and that when I do that, literally my heart rate starts to decrease. My blood pressure starts to decrease. I start to see the stressors and the things that bring me anxiety through an eternal lens, and then my brain begins to shift. And so just experimenting with, if you've never been in the Word before, listen to a devotional, read one verse, sit in that, and experience that. And sanctification is not a one day at a time thing. And what you would know this. Who is the person who quoted, becoming like Jesus is like long obedience in the same direction.
Yeah.
Eugene Peterson.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, so it just reminds me of that. So it's not, I think of it almost in a continuum. At the top of that, there's this OCD laden, it's got to be this way, this way, this way, and it feels oppressive and it feels urgent, like something horrible is going to happen if I don't do it this way. Versus down at the bottom, like, I'm not even paying attention to it at all. I don't need this. And so just paying attention, where am I in that continuum? And how do I lean into something that God has designed for me that is good for my soul?
Yeah. I think the classic temptation is to try to start where you think you should be instead of starting where you are. And one of the things I loved about your message today, even back to the phone thing, is just like, it wasn't like, hey, throw your smartphone in the trash. It was like, hey, just try to go a few hours today. And starting at that early place of start somewhere, and then go.
Well, let's just take a step. Take one step. I mean, following Jesus is taking one step at a time. So take one step that direction. I would say definitely single moms would be the most difficult because, as Donna said, if you're a single mom, especially with a young child, you can't just, I'm just going to take the day off and let, Scooter feed himself. That's not going to happen. But even then, take one step might be, like for the single mom, if you're at church, at least you have a few hours, where you have built-in childcare where you can be around your sisters and be encouraged in that way. Heck, if you're that tired, go to 2 services, fall asleep in the second. That's great. So you get a nap and the word. When it comes to families, I think taking that out of the picture, many families, I would say a huge issue is Western Carolina, there's a lot of options.
Yeah.
A lot of options. And I would say, okay, what is going to feed my soul? And so if you're a Christ follower, you can't ignore, everything overflows from your, above all else, guard your heart, for from it flows the wellspring of life. And he's talking specifically about your relationship with Christ. So what is feeding that, first? So it's not an either or. It's not like, do I go to church or play golf? Do I go to a small group or what?
Yeah.
It's usually a both and. Now, there's seasons when it's like super, and you got to make some choices. Do I let Johnny play in 4 select leagues or 3 select leagues? Those are choices you got to make.
True.
There's the old, not to be the old, the old preacher that's, and I did all the sports and stuff too, but there's a 1/10 of a chance Johnny's going to go play pro. And there's 100% chance Johnny's going to stand before God. And so with that, just make the patterns from that. Now let Johnny go, do all that and encourage it. I would be all for that, but don't neglect one to the other. Right. So, start off and prioritize, we're going to love God, then we're going to love each other. But I'd say take one step, just do one step. All right, we're going to go, instead of going home and everybody getting on their phones, let's go grab a meal and let's just make the deal. During lunch, we're not going to use our phones.
That's great.
So again, it get a little tense because if you're not used to talking to somebody, and you got a teenager's not going to talk to you.
Yeah.
Your own teenager's not going to talk to you but then you never know. And that's why people are like, well, I don't have quantity time with my family. I have quality time. The fallacy of that is you don't know when quality time is going to show up.
Yes.
You don't know when it's going to show up because you're like,
yeah.
See, when I did this podcast 2 weeks ago, I was surprised, and I talked to Lori, but I was surprised, Tyler, of what he said. And that was like 2 decades ago when he said some of my most formative times were because we lived where I could actually take them to school instead of, buses fine and all that stuff. But for him, I'd never heard that before. He was saying some of my most formative times when my dad poured into me were the 15, 20 minutes going to school, and he was like, because I would always say, listen, you're a leader. I would tell him both. I would just little stuff like that. Yeah. And I didn't even know that. And then he's sitting across from me 2 weeks ago or whatever, and he's like, formative times was that rhythm. And not everybody can do that, but take a step, pick where can I reconnect with God, reconnect with family, and just really and get some rest from what I normally do. Yeah. And again, if you're a single mom, you have to just figure out a break during nap time or whatever. And I would, last thing, no matter who you are, almost every one of us, we waste some time here with this phone. Yeah. It's shocking how quickly 25 minutes can go by. And you've looked at, cat video, well, hopefully not cat videos, but you've looked at some. And there's nothing wrong with it. The question is, if I'm really, really tight with my time, man, I just missed 20 minutes that I could have written my son a letter. I could have
rhythm somewhere.
I could have, it's rhythm. So I think we all have the same amount of time. some of us have more different pressures. Nobody's time is more important. But how would God want me to spend these next 24 hours is a question I think we almost always got to ask.
Well, and the phone thing goes back to the numbing you were talking about earlier. You're making a choice there, and it's it's not just time, but you're also doing something that's not.
And what did you say? You were saying that if you numb it and try to stay in control, but that ends up just keeping you in one place versus making any progress.
Development.
Okay, could you say a couple things about that?
Yeah. It's just a way of coping. So if I have something that numbs, alcohol numbs better than most anything.
Okay.
But anything that is a distraction can numb us. And while it's numbing, so that I don't have to think about this, I don't have to stress about this, I don't have to whatever, I don't have to problem solve it, it arrests you. It holds you right there at that point of pain. So as long as that has a hold, life is moving on. You're not growing in it. You're not growing in your relationship with Christ. You're not growing with your family. You're not growing in how to handle the stressors of life. And so then maybe you finally release that thing, and it's 10 years later. Well, you're looking pretty adolescent, Arrested
I should have
development.
called you this week. That would have been great sermon material right there. That was arrested development, man.
But I think about these rhythms.
Yeah.
And you look, where do you start? I think part of where you start is planting a why, giving some incentive. So rhythms are training. Rhythms are the training ground. They're the practice ground, because there's going to be a time that comes. Maybe you're not in a crisis right now, not in a hard space right now, but you will be. And so this rhythm creates the stage so that you're better able to navigate that. And the relationships, the communication is established, and your communication with God is established. You're not having to I'm just going to suddenly reach out to him in a desperate moment. No, I've been knowing him, And so it's just, think of it as training ground. But then the other incentive, and I shared some with you, those who Sabbath have some other healthy rhythms that research indicates almost always goes along with that. And that they have some physical rhythms. They're more likely, I call it movement instead of exercise. We don't like that word.
Yeah.
They move. They're more likely to eat nutritiously. They're more likely to have communities. When we talk about connect groups, these are people who are more likely to be engaged in those. They're more likely then to report marriage satisfaction. They are less likely to have mental health symptoms. So it all fits together. We are whole. This is part of God's plan. And so I think sometimes not just giving permission, but hey, here's some other whys. Even the world would agree. They wouldn't call it Sabbath. They would call it some other things. Also to note, though, all of those effects, the mental health effects, do not go in play with a Sabbath if it's just for a routine. If you're just doing it because a doctor ordered you, it's like go home and get rest. If that's the only reason you're doing it. But if there's a relationship that is being flourished with Christ, that is what shifts the mental health symptoms that are connected with Sabbath.
Hi, my name is Carly, and growing up, I wanted to be a part of the biggest crowd. I wanted to go where everyone went, and I wanted to do what everyone else did. When I was 9 years old, I came to a vacation Bible school here at Biltmore Church, and I heard the gospel clearly presented for the first time. And what God called me to that day was to live a life that was different. And a couple years later, I went to middle school, and that was incredibly hard to live out in my everyday life. And for a while, I faked it. I could be at church and be with my church friends, and I could also be at school and be with my school friends, and those didn't have to be the same girl. But that got incredibly exhausting. And I knew that that's not what God had called me to when I was 9 years old. And so at a summer camp, I decided to live differently for the first time. And throughout my teen years, that meant a life of loneliness. And that meant spending a lot of time by myself, spending a lot of time with my parents. I didn't have a lot of friends growing up. I didn't quite know how to make relationships with people. And I couldn't find people that were gonna be like me and were gonna encourage me in my faith. And so I had to cling to the Lord a lot. And I remember I was by myself and I heard a song. It's called Behold Our God, and it says, He is our Father and He is our friend. And for the first time, at 15 years old, God became so near, and He was so close to me. And I remember thinking, if He's my friend, I can do anything. I don't need somebody at school, I don't need somebody at church, but if I have the Lord, I can do anything. And from there on, while life has not been easy, I have leaned on the Lord in some of the darkest moments of my life. and I have been able to rely on him in ways that I never thought were possible. God is so good, and God has been so kind, and God has also been my friend.
So one other thing I'd love for you to share that we talked about before, I think you'll think this is really cool too, is some of the science behind worship. And when we come in Sunday morning, we choose
Singing.
to worship corporately and sing.
Yes.
For what that does to the brain and the heart.
So you hovered a little while this morning about singing, and I was like, yes. I love it. It is one of my favorite. I love to sing. That's part of it. You know, my history was I was a piano major for a short time. Led worship. I love singing, but when I then started noticing the research behind why God designed us with the capacity to do this. So when we sing, it literally stimulates the vagus nerve, which then stimulates the parasympathetic nervous system. It is the sympathetic nervous system that is pushing the cortisol, that is keeping us in a state of fight or flight. But when we sing, just physically speaking, it begins to calm the body. It's also something you think of what's happening when you're here in a worship service and you are singing with people. It feels like you're in a community. Oxytocin is being released then. That is a bonding hormone. It's the same hormone that's released when a mom is nursing her baby or even in an orgasm. I'm not trying to be too graphic, but it's a bonding thing. It happens when we're singing in community with other believers, which is another reason it's important to be here, to be present with the body. But it is also a mental tool because you are singing lyrics that speak truth into your brain that help dispel some of those lies.
Right.
It's just, and the breathing. You're having to exercise your breath in that it begins to slow the heart rate. It's just a beautiful thing. And isn't God gracious?
Wow.
Yeah, he knows what he's doing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I want to throw another little science thing
Come
at you.
on.
Because one of the things that also happens when you are having some of this, whether you call it Sabbath or not, some people are not necessarily accustomed to calling it that. But when you're having this time of rest with your family, maybe you're hiking and maybe you're worshiping together and you're communing together, you're probably also laughing together. Those are the times when you're more likely to be able to have a belly laugh. God created us with that ability. The same exact hormones are being fired off in those ways. So it's, I think, be with the people, laugh with the people you want to love. You know, maybe you're wrestling to love them. Find ways to laugh with them. Go hiking with the people you want to love.
Right.
And then I want to throw out one other rhythm thing that I've landed on with my family recently. My older 3 boys are all in college, live 4 hours away. So when we do get together, it is so important for us to make much and be very, very intentional about how we do that. And we've started a new rhythm of we will go out to eat. That's one of our favorite things.
Yeah.
We go out to eat, and we will go around the table, tell us what God has been teaching you since we met last. Tell us the areas that you want us to pray about since you've met last. It's been remarkable for all of us. Talk about a high. I experienced a high when just being able to connect with them. But also to be able to enter in what God's doing in their life. The last time we went, they brought 2 of their friends. They were like, we heard y'all are doing this. Can we do it with you too? And so it's good, but those are rhythms. You can't be passive. That is not going to happen automatically.
Right.
But look at the things you miss out on.
Yeah.
Well, that goes to you walked
Sorry.
right. No, you're
awesome.
walking right into where I'd love to wrap up, Pastor, which is talking a little bit about one of your points that we haven't gotten a ton of time to talk about on here a little bit is the importance of community and relationships when it comes to Sabbath, when it comes to rhythms. So maybe that'd be a good place to wrap up, is just kind of speaking into that a little bit, the otherness, the togetherness of some of these rhythms.
Sure. Well, I mean, Donna hit it as well. You've got 2 families. You know, you have your biological family, you have your spiritual family, and they're both actually talked about there, in the Sabbath. But it would the whole family unit that's even in just that 4th commandment. I had not really noticed how exhaustive it is. He goes out of his way to say, this is a whole family deal. This is a whole community deal. And so, to Donna's point, you get them both together if you're worshiping with your family. But it could be as simple rhythms as, if they're away, make it a habit. I remember when my mom was alive, I would call her every Sunday. And that was just a rhythm. Right. I would call her every Sunday, usually on the way home from church or on the way home from a starting point or something like that. And so those rhythms where you're just connecting with folks. And again, it doesn't, you go back to husbands, wives, everybody's in a different place. If your kids are small, you might go do an activity with them. hike, something like that, take a nap together. There's a lot of freedom there. So that's why I was like, the more rules you put on it, the less rest you tend to get. That's why you stay principle based. Is you need to connect with God. Basically, connect with God, connect with people, and there's a physical aspect to it. Where again, tired. I don't think tired is good. I mean, I can speak. I know for men, a man who's not tired is usually a dangerous man. So in other words, if he's like a pickup truck. If he doesn't have a little bit of a load on him, then he's just not riding well. Right. And I would say the same to everybody. We're made to get tired. Work hard, get tired, rest, go back at it. That's why it was kind of cool for me to see or just realize that the Sabbath was right after the cultural mandate. It's like they hadn't done anything. I mean, day 6, boom, cultural mandate. Here are the orders, but day 7, don't do anything. It's like, well, you're not working. They're not resting because they're tired. But as far as community, again, that's where everybody needs. I mean, we kind of found it out during COVID. We've lost the lessons a little bit. I bet you. I'm sure Donna has all the studies. There obviously mental health stuff it was already going that way, but it went out the roof during COVID. And there's a variety of reasons, but one of them for sure was isolation.
Oh, top of the list.
And then and even it's still now it's like we choose isolation if we're isolated now. There's multitude. And a part that I've always realized is being with people does not mean you have community. I mean, going to a Starbucks.
Good point.
And, in their mind, it was the third space. It was the place where you're going to have, but if you go in there, that's not really community. You got people with their laptops open doing their own thing and isolated tables. A community is where, again, you got to kind of ease in. I met so many new folks today that have just moved here and they're like, my first thing I always want to when they come by is just, have you met anybody else? And that's the first step, because I know that's the glue. That's the glue. And if not, then I introduce them immediately, because I know community. I mean, it's kind of cool, at least at this campus. It was interesting. The two, I know in the first service it happened, the second service. So the first service, one of our pastors baptized his childhood friend.
That's cool.
In the second service, another one of the pastors baptized his next door neighbor. Wow. And I'm like, all right, the community and the connection there. Yeah, that's it. And sometimes it's also the way, where people come to Christ. Anyway, you get them around. Most people come to Christ through relationships, not through a sermon or even Billy Graham or somebody like that. It's through, hey, I got to know you. I saw something different. They share the gospel, share the story, share something. God does what he does. That Matthew 11 passage, if you don't have, there's a book called
say that. Gentle and Lowly.
Gentle and Lowly, which is really not on Sabbath at all. It's really just on the Matthew 11. Yeah. But it is very refreshing in the take on it by Ortlund. What's the guy's first name?
Yeah, I get him confused.
It's either Gavin or Dane or whichever.
Favorite books ever.
And it's kind of semi-devotional. It's like 3 or 4 pages per chapter. So Gentle and Lowly is really, really, really good. That whole thing is very refreshing.
That's a great resource.
About resting in the gospel is really what it is.
Yeah. Matthew 11.
I was telling him before you came in last night, I sensed, as I was just praying about our time together, God impressing that specific scripture on my heart. This morning I got up, that was the devotion that I had. 30 minutes later, Mark comes to me, because I told him last night, he comes to me and he says, it's the scripture for the devotion. And you used it in the sermon, you just brought it back up again.
Well, good.
So there's a repetition there because, again, the stressed, anxious world that we're in, God is saying, come to me, you who are weary. Your weariness qualifies you for the invitation. Come to me, and I will give you rest. And that gentle and lowly, most of the time we just pay attention to the verse. We forget the part that actually this is an invitation into the heart of Christ, that he is gentle, he is lowly, he is safe. We don't have to figure all this out. He is our bed of rest.
Yep.
Wow, that is
gentle and lowly.
That is a great exclamation point on the conversation. Great resource to recommend there. Thank you.
It's actually right behind you.
I think it's on the shelf here, right?
Yes, right behind you. Gentle and lowly. We are going for the which Ortlund is it?
That is the only book I have ever read and immediately started reading it a second time.
Yep.
It's that good.
So good. Pick up a copy. We'll throw a link in the description of the episode for you if you're watching or listening. Again, thank you all both. I think I'm very confident this is going to encourage and equip our people in an amazing way. So thank you everybody listening. Thank you everybody watching. Sunday, join us again. We got a couple more weeks in this series, and as you know, it's been awesome so far, and then we'll be back next Wednesday with another episode. As always, we ended it the same way. You're loved and sent.
And go take a nap.